Good morning. This is Doug Dalma back with our readings through the Presbyterian Philosopher, the authorized biography of Gordon H. Clark. And we're up to the chapter on 4 theological contributions of Gordon Clark. And we're on now contribution number 3 on a solution to the problem of evil, what is called a theodicy. And that's, of course, not referring to Odysseus and the Odyssey, but it is theodicies, God and evil, the problem or supposed problem that some see here, but Clark certainly did not. In fact, you should really see that the problem is not one at all, but it is really the burden is on those who contend that it is a problem. But the Christian need not see a problem here, or shouldn't see a problem, and doesn't have to go into mystery or paradox to try to explain this. But we'll see Clark here, as typical to him, finds a logical solution or a logical way of understanding this issue. I will note also today is voting Tuesday for the midterm elections. And my view on things like this is that it is indeed important that we vote politicians out of office, but I'm not quite as confident about voting others into office. And so this is where the real problem of evil lies in our society, is in the political apparatus. So I certainly pray that the Lord does good things today, and that our new leaders will abide by, will follow the Lord's will. So we are, up to that third contribution now. I'll say also thank you for so many who watched the last video. It was quite well received on the subject of teleological supralapsarianism. I didn't know there was so many fans of the subject, but that is indeed a good thing. So let's look now at number 3. A frequent argument posed against Orthodox Christianity is the so-called problem of evil. The argument asserts that the Christian worldview is not logically valid, as it cannot consistently and simultaneously believe the following 3 doctrines. 1, God is loving. 2, God is omnipotent or all-powerful. And 3, there is evil in the world. It is argued that acceptance of any 2 of these 3 doctrines requires a denial of the third. Yet Christians hold to all 3 simultaneously, hence a problem. Are Christians being illogical? Are their doctrines inconsistent? Naturally, Gordon Clark, in his desire for a systematic and non-paradoxical Christianity, addressed this supposed problem. In his chapter, God and Evil in Religion, Reason, and Revelation, he presented an answer to the problem of evil consistent with Reformed theology and the Westminster Confession of Faith. A common Christian answer, now this is not Clark's view, but a common Christian answer is to assume God gave man free will, which man then exercised for evil, preceded by Satan's similar choice. This answer is intended to protect God from charges of creating evil by putting the responsibility on man and angels. However, according to Clark, it only moves the issue one step further. It begs the question, why does God allow there to be evil? Permission, Clark argued, only makes sense when there is a force independent of the actor. The idea of permission is inconsistent with a sovereign, omnipotent God who has no force independent of him. Clark pointed to John Calvin as supporting the same position. I have a footnote there. I think it's worth reading because I think most Calvinists, of course, haven't read very much of Calvin and might be surprised. So this is Calvin on a very strong point here, which would defeat many modern so-called Calvinists. He says this: here they have recourse to the distinction between will and permission. By this, they would maintain that the wicked perish because God permits it, not because he so wills. But why shall we say permission unless it is because God so wills? Still, it is not in itself likely that man brought destruction upon himself through himself, by God's mere permission and without any ordaining, as if God did not establish the condition in which he wills the chief of his creatures to be. I shall not hesitate then simply to confess with Augustine that the will of God is the necessity of things, and that what he has willed will of necessity come to pass. That's Calvin's Institutes. Okay, continuing. Closely related to the idea of permission is the idea that man has free will, the ability to choose between two incompatible actions, or said another way, that the will is ultimately free from any outside factor or influence. Clarke rejected the idea of free will, but accepted free agency, that man's will is free from outside forces in the world, but not free from God. Thus, man makes choices as he is a free agent, but these choices are only made within God's will or plan. I then say here, Clarke took a compatibilistic view. I'm not sure he ever used that term, and I might want to question my own conclusion here, but I think this is right. Clarke took a compatibilistic view between the free agent's ability to choose and the deterministic necessity of that choice occurring as God has willed it. He wrote, "A choice is a deliberate volition, even if it could not have been different." I think that's worth thinking about in rereading. A choice is still a deliberate volition, even if it could not have been different. Yeah, that's a little challenging to think about, but hopefully that makes sense. Clarke's view was that God is the cause of all things. Therefore, God is the cause of evil. Clarke pulled no punches, saying, quote, "Let it be unequivocally, not with a B, unequivocally said that this view certainly makes God the cause of sin. God is the sole ultimate cause of everything. There is absolutely nothing independent of him. He alone is the eternal being. He alone is omnipotent. He alone is sovereign," unquote. Clarke found support for this doctrine in the Westminster Confession of Faith, which states that God ordains whatsoever comes to pass, and foreordained even the means by which everything is accomplished. Yet, while God is the ultimate cause of sin, he is not the author of sin. The author is the immediate cause, whereas God is only the ultimate cause of sin. Man's responsibility, Clarke argued, does not derive from free will, but from God's sanction. Man is responsible for his actions, not because he has the ability to choose otherwise, he does not, but because God set punishments for those actions. God, on the other hand, cannot sin. Whatever God decrees is right simply because he decrees it. Whatever God does is just. What he commands men to do or not to do is similarly just or not just. Clarke wrote, "God is neither responsible nor sinful, even though he is the ultimate cause of everything. He is not sinful because, in the first place, whatever God does is just and right. It is just and right simply in virtue of the fact that he does it. Justice or righteousness is not a standard external to God to which God is obligated to submit. Righteousness is what God does," unquote. So, why is there evil in the world, in a world created and sustained by a loving, omnipotent God? Almost hidden in Clarke's writing on God and evil is his answer. In his refutation of a non Christian professor, and speaking of that professor's view, Clarke wrote, quote, "To suppose that God created the good and the evil for his own glory, to bestow his love on the good and his wrath on the evil, is, in the view of the non Christian, to lower God to the level of the most degenerate human tyrant," unquote. This is Clarke's answer, and it is a biblical one. God created the good and the evil for his own glory, to bestow love on the good and wrath on the evil. This doctrine likely came from Paul's letter to the Romans, where Paul wrote, quote, "What if God, desiring to show his wrath and to make known his power, has endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, in order to make known the riches of his glory, for vessels of mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for glory." Romans 9:22 and 23. Well, there I emphasized that verse of Paul's that Clark had found. And it looks like here, I've also been referencing, as I said, his reason or religion, reason, and revelation. I'm somewhat surprised I didn't mention here Clark's first sort of foray into this subject in his article, Determinism and Responsibility. And I always remember this one because it's so important. 1932, Evangelical Quarterly. Clark comes out with this, so he's only 30 years old, and there he has a very interesting argument as well, and it works on the idea of defining what responsibility means. How can man be responsible for his actions if he is determined by God to do what he does? And so it's related to the problem of evil. Perhaps it's not exactly the problem of evil, and that's why I didn't mention it here in this bit. But that is worth reading. You can probably find that on the Trinity Foundation website, or you can go to a big library and dig in the Evangelical Quarterly. And then, so that's the first one, Determinism and Responsibility. And then Clark's Religion, Reason, and Revelation, which is later printed in just a standalone volume of just that chapter, I believe, where it's called God and Evil, the Problem Solved. So this is a very short section here, but hopefully it is valuable to you. If you missed the answer there, listen to this again, but also read Clark, because it's something that I read these multiple times and didn't quite get it, and it comes by particularly quickly. So yeah, there's two real elements to look at there. Clark's definition of responsibility, which I don't have at hand, but there's a passage there in that determinism and responsibility that is key, and then also to understand that God has created all things for his glory. And so even things that a person might not like or a person sees as evil, the Lord has and does bring good out of that, and ultimately brings his own glory in those circumstances. So fairly simple, but I think we will cut it there. And next, the next contribution is the number 4, arguments for a return to traditional logic. And I think I'm actually probably going to skip reading this section, as it is so complicated that I'm not even entirely sure I've figured it out right in the volume here. And I have long quotes from Clark and some charts and graphs, and it's probably better read than listened to. So you really need to see that stuff. So we will likely skip over that, and next time read chapter 11 on Clark's boys, which are his students there at Wheaton College, because he had no sons, he had just daughters. And so the sort of a play on that the boys are these theological students of his. Just thinking of one more thing. When I wrote this book, learned of Clark's chess game as well. He taught chess there at Wheaton. I had yet to play any chess, but in recent years I've gotten somewhat into it. Suppose I'm getting better, but the way chess works, you always feel like you're 1,000 levels behind some other players. So looking forward to an infinite afterlife of increasing my chess game. I hope you are as well. I think I'm coming around to Clark's view that it is the greatest of games. So we will cut it there and go out and vote if you feel like it, and don't if you don't. But whatever you do it in prayer. So have a good day. God bless.